to talk about the Trans-Iowa low-cost parlors, as Dan said, and so I want to go through actually the thought process. How do you go about building a Trans-Iowa low-cost parlor? And when you take a look at this parlor, it's a type of parlor that I'd put up against anybody's parlor, just in the way of safety, ergonomics, labor efficiency, throughput, and just a whole host of things. I just think it's probably one of the best products on the market right now. One of the thought processes we're taking a look at the stall barns and also these small herringbone parlors is that there definitely is a very cost-effective alternative to realize that. And when we take a look at both the labor costs and also the facility costs of different types of systems, I would tend to say that this low-cost parlor is probably the most labor efficient and also the most financially efficient way to milk a cow as well. When we take a look at different types of robots that I talked about last Friday, so I'm not going to spend much time doing that, but they tend to be another $1, $1.50 a hundredweight more expensive. Some of the conventional parlors as well can tend to be another $1 or so a hundredweight more expensive as well. When you take a look at these low-cost parlors, I tend to say that if we can try to milk cows for 75 cents to $1 per hundredweight, and that's with all your investment costs and all your labor costs included, that's a pretty good area to work with. And maybe that doesn't sound like a lot when you take a look at the thought process of milk is in that 22, 24 range. When milk is 16 or 17, that extra $1 a hundredweight can actually make a big difference in the profitability of a dairy farm. So we realize that this type of parlor is not for grazers, just for grazers. We've seen a lot of conventional parlors or dairy people put these in as well. One day I got a call from the University of Kentucky, and they were basically saying that this is the most popular type of parlor that's actually being put in Kentucky right now, and it's not just on the grazing farms. And so we're looking at this for their university facility as well. So my biggest premise is that if there's 60 to 64 cows per person per hour is kind of the standard. We take a look at a lot of the systems that are being milked out there, that we still have some systems where they're milking 20, 24 cows per person per hour, 35, 40 in some types of milking parlors. And so the question becomes, how difficult is it really to milk a cow? So here we've got a 12-year-old kid that can actually milk 60, 64 cows in an hour by himself. And granted, he's a little bit on the taller side, but I just want to kind of show a video of how something like this might work. Okay, I'm going to turn the I'm going to have to talk over the video of this a little bit here. So basically you have your swing arms here. We're milking the cows between the back legs, which is the safest way. Because of the slope of the floor, these cows are going to come in and actually spread the back legs, which is really neat to be able to have the cows do that, so you can milk them between the back legs a little bit easier. It's definitely the safest way to milk a cow. His back is straight up. You can still see his cows. The face is protected because of the kick bar, so it's very difficult to actually get kicked in this kind, but this is a 12-year-old kid milking these cows between the back legs. So I just wanted to kind of show when cows are a little bit dirtier, sometimes you might get some, forearms might get a tad little bit dirty, but the key is the cow should be coming in here pretty clean to begin with as we try to attach the units here. This little contraption here is part of the chop gate, so I can actually open that chop gate from several different places, which I'll show in another video. This video is the one I want to just it's probably the best parlor I've ever seen. And basically what this guy did was take the Trans-Iowa design, and all by himself, this guy, single person, can milk in a swing 15 and milk about 75 to 80 cows per person per hour. And again, all this farmer did was take our blueprints and actually build this thing himself. So I don't appreciate being a Packer fan that he's got a Viking shirt on here, but I couldn't ask him to change during the video. But it's a swing over type parlor, so we've got our swing and takeoffs here with the swing arms. He prepped 5, and now he's going to attach 5 units. And as you take a look at that, how many units are really sitting at any given time? Sometimes I question if maybe a swing 12 might have about the same throughput, but they really felt the 5, 5, and 5 of prepping, attaching 5, and then going to the next 5 was the most efficient way to work this. So again, look at the ergonomics. There's no bending. There's no bending his head back. There's no leaning his arms forward. Just a very ergonomically correct way to actually have these cows milk. And so now he's starting to prep the next 5 since he's got the first 5 on. And you'll notice also that there's a few different places in the pit where he can actually start moving cows forward. So he starts doing it right there. You can kind of hear the bell, hopefully, as he's prepping that next set of 5 cows. So those are placed in the spot where, just as he's finishing up those the 4th and 5th cow, that he's able to bring those cows forward. So the biggest mistake that people make in just about any milking parlor is that we tend to train our cows to not come into the milking parlor. And I'm really serious when I say that, is because this guy doesn't get out of the pit. Okay, so when people put in a new milking parlor, the first thing I'll tell them is when you start milking in here, clear your social calendar for about 2 to 3 weeks and train your cows to come into your parlor without getting out of the pit. Else you're going to be training those cows to stand out there until you come out and get them for the next 20 and 30 years. Okay, so it's a very important piece of a thought process in training these cows to the milking parlor. So again, that if I'm going to spend money on a milking parlor, I'm going to spend it on my automatic takeoffs, because it's such a repetitive system. I don't have to think about these cows. And I'm also going to spend money on this crowd gate. And sometimes these crowd gates are going to cost us $25,000 up to $5,000, but it's a very cheap employee to be able to work with. So these cows aren't even fully loaded on the back of this parlor yet, but he's able to start milking. Because of the length of this parlor, he's able to start milking these front cows without having the back cows actually even loaded into the parlor yet. So I know one of the things that people like to do is they like to jump out of the pit, get the side fully loaded, and then start milking them, and that costs people a lot of time and sometimes a lot of frustration too, trying to get them to work with. So I'm just going to let this video run here just a little bit more so you can see, even to the point where even working through there, very seldom are there more than 2 or 3 units actually sitting here. So this Swing 15 is actually a very nice sized parlor, but also realize that the herd that you're seeing here is probably producing about 80 to 84 pounds a day. And so if we have herds that are in that 50 to 60 pounds, you're kind of probably going to be back into that Swing 12 type thing for one person to try to work with, and sometimes even a Swing 10 if they're jerseys, crossbreds that are even lower production than that. So it really needs to size the parlor to the milk, the cows themselves production-wise, and who that person is trying to milk the cows. So there's a lot of things that happen in a Trans-Iowa parlor, but this isn't just for the design here. This is for anybody that's milking in any kind of a parlor. There's a couple things that I tend to say are oversold. Rapid exit, in my mind, is a very oversold piece of equipment in the dairy industry. And believe it or not, I can get cows to enter and leave a parlor just as fast, if not faster, with an all-in, all-out type system based on this chop gate. So I want you to watch this chop gate work, because this is the key to the system, is that I can load cows and I can also unload cows at the exact same time because of this chop gate, because it cuts them from the front. If there's a cow just milked and a cow not milked, I can actually use this gate to cut them. So it's a follower leader system. And the difference is, instead of having this set all the way opened, and then you shut the gate, and then you open this up for the cows to come in here, the next set, it takes a lot longer for this first cow to actually come up all the way to the front versus a cow just left and she's following her through. So again, it's a follower leader system to get it through. But here's the video. So these chop gates tend to cost maybe $250, $300 to get installed. But again, as you take a look at it, the cows just left. A cow that just got milked and one that isn't milked, we can actually chop them from the front, and we can move this a couple different places actually within the parlor itself. So that's a simple concept of a chop gate, a lot cheaper than a rapid exit type parlor. And if I was going to be a betting person on which one's faster, I'd actually bet my money on the all-in, all-out type system with the chop gate. So we're going to go to another video. I call this one the 45-second drill. So without getting out of the pit, and this is only about 2 to 3 weeks after the parlor was built, so these cows are still pretty new to this thing, but this is a 45-second drill as the chop gate comes open. And so this is not a split chop gate, it's actually just a single unit there. And some of these cows might be a little camera shy early on with the parlor here, but again, the key is after 2 weeks, these guys still are not getting out of the pit, and cows will come into it. And this isn't even the first set or the second set coming through. This is actually about midway through the milking here. So again, this one's milked, that one's milked, this one is not milked. And now she's right up to the front of the gator ready. And as soon as that front cow starts coming up, we can start prepping these cows, and don't worry about these cows in the back, but actually they funnel in there pretty fast as we go through there. So I'm going to stop for a second. Can you still hear me okay, Dan?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Am I talking too fast, too slow?
Good.
When I talk to people like from, other states, sometimes I got to talk a little slower, they're a little faster,
no, we can, yeah.
depending on where they're from. Okay, so that's kind of the thought process in video format. So you can kind of see that these things are very efficient in cows working through. The next thing I want to step in is that sometimes we can fit these in some pretty small places. So this is actually my own home parlor, and it's only 15 feet 3 inches wide from width to width all the way through there. So I'm milking more crossbred type and Jersey type cows, but I can fit a Holstein in here. But instead of a Holstein sitting at a 70-degree angle, she might be more at a 60-degree angle, and she's going to turn herself a little bit more, which changes the dynamics of the whole parlor. But again, we can still get it done. So I'm not going to go through these dimensions as of yet, but I will take a look at some of these dimensions a little bit later on. So the pit size, how wide do you want this? Okay, so if I can have my no restrictions, I want my pit about 6 foot or 6.5 feet. I don't want it any wider because that's just more steps for me. I actually like milking in about a 4 or 5 foot pit if I'm there by myself. If you're not by yourself, just hopefully you like the other person, but it's nice to have that 6.5 feet, especially as you do testing and a few other things happening with that, and making sure we have at least a foot of overhang in here to actually, if you at some point in time you want to put this as a low line, you can do that as well. Okay, so the next thing I want to talk about is on this side we have a manure pan. Okay, as I just slide it down, this side we just have a splash guard, about a 2 foot piece that can catch manure, or at least hit the manure, and then it drops on the floor. If I was to take a look at, this is actually in the same parlor, it was a demonstration parlor at a college that we took a look at. Which side do you think milkers tended to prefer? The splash guard side over here or the manure pan side? Who says the manure pan? Nobody?
Yeah, one.
Splash guard. One did? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so the milkers tend to prefer the splash guard. So even whether it be inspectors or whoever, this is labor in trying to clean this out. And it probably catches sometimes about 2/3 of the manure patties, so you're still going to get some that actually fall down here unless you really have a tight parlor, which some cows don't like tight parlors either. So the big thing with this one is I want to do a little demonstration here. If I could just ask everybody to stand up just for a few seconds. So we'll call this our first inning stretch. And I want you to take your head and I want you to just move it 3 inches forward. Okay, and just feel the stress that gets put on your back there. So maybe it's not major, but now you can sit back down. And if you take a look at the thought process of doing that on 80 cows, 2 and 3 times per cow, twice a day, that's just a lot of stress that people put on their backs that they really don't need to put on. But that's what's going to happen if you put a manure pan in, is that typically you're either going to, depending on how high you are as well, or tall you are, is that you'll either be moving your head 6 inches forward because that cow has moved 6 inches forward or 5 inches forward, or you're going to be bending your head back if you're too tall because that manure pan is there and you're going to start milking cows with your head back a little bit, which puts a stress on your back the other way. So again, this is not conducive to having a very ergonomic parlor. And plus this manure pan tends to come down lower than actually a splash guard would. Okay, so you actually lose some cow visibility with that as well. And so that's just one of the thoughts, is that I would tend to prefer, and most milkers tend to prefer, the splash guard, but for some reason the industry likes to sell a lot more of the manure pan. The other case in point here is that if you have a properly designed parlor and you don't have a lot of stress, or sometimes I know you get some biting flies and things like that, but 3 manure patties per 100 cows is what you should be expecting. And so why go through all this frustration for that manure patty to not just be able to hit the floor? There's a little bit other design here too, is that you hit this to the back end of the cow. So hopefully if they do urinate or defecate here, is that it's going to hit the splash guard and then drop straight down. The biggest frustration is you don't want manure coming into the pit. So it all happens in the design of this piece, so it actually comes straight down and actually hits the floor. You might get some splattering once in a while, but the big thing is you don't want manure patties themselves falling on the milking units as they're sitting there somewhere. Okay, so typically we can build this one was actually built for about $40,000. It was a 46 cow tie stall barn that looked like a very nice parlor by the time we got done. So what's it cost to build one of these? So just real quickly, if I was going to build a swing 10 or a swing 12, my steel, and nowadays I tend to build them more out of galvanized steel than anything, around $2,800 to $3,200 for the galvanized steel, anywhere from 12 to 15 yards of cement at whatever prices you have for cement or concrete there. And then the forms, and I tend to use plastic forms, which are stay-in-place forms, so that the walls are white when you're done, and you don't have to worry about that, and I'll show some examples of that later on. Or you can make your own wooden forms, a lot cheaper, but the difference in the labor between these two, I'd much rather prefer just to do the plastic, because in the end it might actually be the cheaper alternative. With the equipment, everybody's equipment installation is a little bit different, so this is basically just the guts of the parlor. You might have to do some kind of a temporary milking setup and all the electrical, plumbing, miscellaneous, and things like that, the walls or whatever. So the basic guts of the parlor really don't cost that much to actually build. And again, there's some labor that might double this part of it, or maybe even triple it. But the cost is really tends to be in the equipment and the installation of that stuff.
Larry, there's a question about where the plans for this setup can be found.
Okay. The plans are on the internet, and there's no cost to the plans. You can actually just pick them up there. And at my last slide, I'll actually have the website for those plans. Okay.
Yep.
And then so this is another one that was actually the 32 cow stall barn that we actually saw the video of, the 45-second drill. That was about a $28,000 deal. Again, using galvanized for some of it. This was actually just regular black steel that gets painted down. So if you take this option, yeah, it tends to be a little cheaper. You're probably going to be painting this parlor every 4 or 5 years just to keep it, but you're still going to get some rust and things like that coming with it. But it definitely is an option if you want to go cheap. Here, the milk line actually stayed up high because the jar actually stayed in the pit, which is an option. I'd much prefer to actually put that jar in the front end of the parlor here. The swing arms are just coming out of some old stall barn that they use. We tend to find whatever steel we have on the farm to try to use to deal with some of this stuff. This is where the takeoff would go, but this producer chose not to put the takeoffs in. You can see the chop gates here, but you can also see all these handles here. So all these handles actually move the chop gate. So we can deal with this chop gate from any place in the pit. And this chop gate here, as you start pushing this down over center, this thing will actually come up all by itself once it gets pushed over center. And I'll show a picture just because it's weighted in a certain way with concrete inside one of these pipes to actually be able to just pull it off center, and it actually opens up itself. So it's actually more ergonomically correct, or as ergonomically correct as pushing a button. It's so simple to try to deal with that. This parlor was about $40,000 in Jones County, Iowa. And you can basically see he picked up any kind of steel he found laying around the farm, and he actually built the parlor with it. These are the galvanized splash guards, but everything else was just steel that he had laying around that he actually built the parlor with. Did put the takeoffs on the swing arms. I'd like to see this at a little bit different angle, but definitely working very well for him, and so still a pretty cheap one to actually work with. And I think they were drinking a Pepsi or something like that here on a field day that we had with it. Okay, so what I want to get away with is that if we know of parlors around the area that guys are milking like this, not good. The only thing this is good for is the dentist sometimes. Just not ergonomically correct. These pit walls are so low. These people are actually even not very tall people that are bending over, but just all these old herringbones. There's definitely a very better alternative. And what I like to say about the herringbones, if you have like double 8 herringbone, I can usually fit about 12, sometimes even 13 cows per side on the same space that you've got the 8. The swing 4 we can usually put into a swing 7, 8, and I've actually done this one right here. Actually became a swing 10 in the same space I had for a swing 4 herringbone. So there's definitely ways to convert these things and fit a lot more cows in a lot smaller space. So here you're dealing with about 45 inches per cow in a parabone, which is halfway between a herringbone and a parallel. we actually deal with about 28 to 30 inches cow space. A parallel will actually cost you about 36 inches per cow space. So these cows are actually kind of alternated a little bit, interlocking bellies. That's why they're smaller spaces between the cows themselves. So very easy to convert these things. So this was actually, prior to this, I would call a very ugly stall barn that now looks like a very nice milking parlor. So as an alt stub, we put it into a swing 16 parabone. If you take a look at, I like to use this slide for what do cows like. Okay, the first thing cows like is open space. So I like to put wide open garage doors, 12, 14 foot in the back here. So we're dealing with a lot of cow psychology as we actually work with these parlors. And when you take a look at the open space, instead of having these cows come in, sometimes we see these down to 28, 32-inch doors. Cows just simply do not like that. And plus, these cows can sit out in this holding area and they can see what's all happening down in here, so they don't have to stick their head through this small door and then figure out what's happening down there today. They already know what's happening because they have the ability to actually see it a little bit. We realize that cows like to walk uphill, so as cows walk into this parlor from the back side here, they're going to walk up about a 2% slope. So we realize that cows like to do that, so we're going to allow them to do it because they'll actually come in a little bit faster as they do that. We also realize that cows don't like to stand with their front feet lower than their back feet. So we're actually going to take the slope from here to the front of the parlor down 2%. And once they do that, they're actually going to back up. So whether I'm milking a Holstein or whether I'm milking a Jersey, these cows are going to back up for me. So I don't have to worry about the space in front of the parlor because their udders are all going to be back here. The second thing that happens when you have that dual slope of up and down here is that cows come in, they turn at their 70-degree angle because that's where the gate is, and then they'll also spread the back legs because they want to brace themselves a little bit because now it's a little bit lower here than their other foot here, so they'll actually open the back legs up for us, so that's an important part of the whole system as well. Then we realize that cows respond to light. So dark and dingy parlors are not ones that cows like to work with. So I've had some parlor installations where I've taken a look at, as I do facility assessments, they ask me to come out and say what's wrong, and I basically say, well, there's no light in the parlor, so cows don't like to come into it. And simply by adding more light in people's parlors, we actually get increased throughput because cows are attracted to it. So rule number one is you don't want more light in your holding area than you actually have in the parlor, and sometimes that might actually happen. So they don't want to go to the darker place, they want to go to the lighter place because they're attracted to it. The other thing that we take a look at is cows don't like shadows. So if you're those guys that are milking in a stall barn, when you first train a heifer and trying to get them to jump over that gutter, what do they see? To them, because they don't see 3D like we do, that's like trying to ask them to jump over the Grand Canyon, okay, because they don't know how deep that thing is because they have no 3D vision. So when you take a look at these shadows, what does a cow see when they see a lot of shadows? They don't know because they don't see 3D. So that could be a big hill or a big hole or a big crevice as well. And so we want to make sure that we cross in this pit with our 8-foot lights on a 6-foot pit. So you can see there's very low shadows on this platform whatsoever for these cows to see. So it's very easy for them to work with. When they see grates in a parlor, they don't know exactly what that is either. They don't see the 3D. So that can be something that limits their input as well. Okay, so the next question is going to be, so now I'm going to build this thing, but how am I going to deal with my temporary milking system? So this is one that I just want to show. It's a palpation rail. You can get those plans from probably any extension services around. And so we just put this up on cement blocks, filled it with gravel, put some rubber mats on top of it, put the milk line outside. They did this a little bit before the inspectors actually saw it, so they got away with it. Sometimes it's better to ask forgiveness, but make sure your inspector tends to be aware of what you're doing here. So you can do it this way. The same contraption could be built inside of a building, pretty darn cheap. And this is actually a portable palpation rail that we used here, so you can just lift it back off when they get done. And then he's got his palpation rail that he wanted anyway. So that's one option. If you're in a stall barn, what we'll do is actually build the parlor up in the front side of it, and then still milk on the back side, actually run all the milk lines up along the wall over here so you can still get it into it, but we can actually build a parlor while still milking in half the stall barn there. Okay, so in stall barns, for those that are milking in stall barns, you have all these I-beams or posts going across, and so sometimes we need to actually cross I-beams across here and brace them down and actually use that as a way to get rid of the post in the holding area or the milking parlor, and really usually it's not a very big deal. The caution is that when you start welding this up against the wood, you do this in the morning and make sure that you have a barn there the next morning. Okay, so you do this and weld in the morning, you throw water on it, make sure this thing is all cooled down, and you keep an eye on it during the day to make sure you don't get any smoldering in some of this. So it might not be the safest way to do it, but that's how most producers seem like they tend to get rid of the beams. So now we're going to start creating this parlor into a stall barn, but again, it doesn't have to be a stall barn. So usually stall barns have these beams going a third of the way down here. We've got another beam going down through here. We got rid of all the posts in here by just doing those beams across the wall up over top here. And the other third here that's on the back side, so we usually only need about 2/3 of the barn to actually create the parlor and the holding area. We're going to put a 5-foot door here. We're going to put a wall here, which is starting to drill the legs into the cement to be able to actually put a foot concrete wall. You could put a 3-foot concrete wall here if you want. The area is going to be over here is going to end up being a palpation rail and an exit alley in this 11 or 12 feet there. So we're going to dig this pit with a skid steer. We can do it with a backhoe. You just need a second tractor or skid steer to be able to pull this out here the last couple loads of dirt that are going to be coming out. So make sure we work with the safety of it, but we can definitely dig these pits pretty easy with the skid steer. So now we're going to start designing the pit floor. So it's just going to be bracing this around, make sure we're reed rodding this thing through. So we can either do the walls first or the floors first, but I tend to do the floor first just to make sure we get all the measurements and everything a little bit easier. It's easier to work on the cement than it is on the dirt trying to do some of the measurements. When we take a look at the first floor, and this is all going to be happening within about a 5-day period that we can actually get this parlor built. So we can usually come in on a Sunday. We'll have this pit floor poured by early Monday morning. And you can see the screed board that we used here where it's shallower in the middle than it is on the end. And so basically we take a 2x6, we cut 2 inches out of the parlor itself, or not the parlor, we take 2 inches out of the middle of the board itself, and then we'll cut that down so it's in there, and we'll use that as a screed board, and you kind of see that we've got a little crown here. So test number 2 is that when you have your toes lower than your heels, it takes the stress off your back as well. So every time these milkers are facing the cow, they actually have that stress off their back as well because their toes are lower than their heels, plus they got toe lip space going in through there. The hole in the back is for the sump pump, which we want to make sure we don't forget. And then we'll also put our re-rod in here to be able to put the plastic forms for the walls there as well. So now you can kind of see the difference here versus there and here is that we have a very nice little crown. So if you cut 2 inches out, you'll end up with about 1.5 inches higher in the middle of the pit than you will at the side, which is nice for the water to drain as well. So this is what these plastic forms look like. They're 36 inches here. I think they're 42 inches here on the end walls or whatever. And so when you get done, these forms just stay in place, and then you've already got plastic, so you don't have to cover the cement with plastic. It's already done for you by the time you get done, but it definitely saves at least almost 2 days worth of labor to work with it. So now we're going to start real quickly forming the overhang with a 2x12 here. It's the same 2x12 I use for the walls over on the other side, and then we're going to brace that in the back. And as you take a look at the how you're going to brace it, so I'm just going to, this presentation is going to be on the internet as well, so I'm not going to go through a lot of the detail. That's basically how we're going to brace the overhang of the platform pit. And then we're going to brace it from side to side, secure all the nib rails in here. So this nib rail is going to have about 7 inches of cement into it, and you can brace this nib rail back at a 30-degree angle, which we tend to do now, and you just want to make sure that it's not higher than the cow's dew claw, so they're going to hit the dew claws on it, but most of them actually kind of brace these back. But that's how we kind of brace the thing. It's a 4x10 sheet of galvanized steel that we cut in 4, so they're 12 inches. We got about 1/2 inch on the bottom for a lip, go up about 9 inches, and then we back 1 inch and down 1 inch, where we actually go up about 7.5 inches and then brace it back this way about 2.5 inches, and down this way 3/4 of an inch, and back this way 3/4 of an inch to secure that nib rail in there. Okay, so the next way, if you don't use the plastic forms, then we do sometimes a single-sided form that basically putting some re-rod in here, and here we're actually going to pour the walls before they pour the floor, but just 4x8 sheets of plywood braced as best you can, and these things tend to move, especially the first one that goes in there, so they're not foolproof thing, but usually if they move an inch or two, not a big deal because they're going to be underneath and nobody's going to notice that besides the person that actually built it by the time everything is done. So when you get all this bracing done, this is what it's going to kind of look like. You got to make sure that you use some pretty heavy duty screws in here and a lot of screws. Otherwise, this cement's actually going to break these boards out, especially down here in the bottom. And so to make sure that we actually put another board down across the bottom of this, so the cement's going to break that out. It's amazing how much power this cement has, even if it's only 6 inches wide going down 4 feet, but there's still a lot of power in that to break these things out. So again, these are cheaper, but they tend to have a lot more labor involved with them as well. And so by the time we're done where these arrows are, we got to make sure we cross brace this just a lot as well to make sure that these things, like I said, don't break out. Okay, so now we're pouring some of the pit walls here. Again, you can kind of see what that looks like. Again, the bracing of it, I did put this line in here so you can see that this board actually moved a little bit. These walls actually did move a little bit, but again, by the time you get the platform on top here, nobody's actually going to notice that either. So it's not always foolproof or picture perfect to do it with the braces or the single-sided forms, but they definitely can get the job done. Okay, so now we're going to move quickly into the drain. So the only drains that are in this parlor are in the back of it by the holding area on each side. And so everything's going to slope down towards the wall, and then plus it's going to slope down towards the holding area. So there's a drain here, and there's going to be a drain line going underneath the dirt here. There's going to be a drain in the back of it. There's also going to be a drain in the sump where the sump pump is. That's going to connect into this drain, and that basically is all you really need to it. The other thing I want to show here is that you can see the re-rod is in squares, about 2.5 to 3 foot squares, and it's going to be every piece of steel that the cow is going to come into contact with is welded to this equipotential plane that we did also here. So this is going to be drained, and you can also see some copper tubing here. Maybe not real easy, but that's copper tubing. So we'll always try to put 2 systems of to deter, because sometimes these welds can break in the cement. So we also have the copper tubing in here, whatever, to make sure we don't have any stray voltage at any point in time in this parlor. If you don't need a sump pump down in the bottom, and this one could just drain straight out, it's a pretty simple process to actually just connect these over into it for the drain lines. Here, if you put a sump pump, it's always nice to have that electrical box underneath by that sump pump as well. But this sump pump's going to work. It's going to connect into that drain line, and then it's going to go straight out. So a very simple process to work with as well. So here's the wall being poured on the side here. Again, there's going to be a 5-foot opening here for the cows to actually exit out here into the palpation rail. And here we can, instead of just a 1-foot wall, there's actually about a 3-foot wall. So again, depending on what you want with it, but once you get these walls covered, or some kind of a plastic or whatever, you can kind of just make your decision, but you really don't need that big of a wall out towards the front. With this picture here, you can see the sump pump here for that, the drain thing here, the screed board trying to get ready for that, and it's nice to use either just chalk or whatever, instead of using a lot of different ways that people try to form up to make sure they get the level straight. But when you take a look at, even as long as you got a nice straight top line wall, you can put this board, even if this was the cement right here, to put that right along the wall. It tends to be a pretty nice screed by the time you're done. So this is just another part that we're kind of framing up here, so I'm not going to take the time to work down through there. When you take a look at framing this, usually this nib rail will just get welded right to the concrete, or some people stick bolts in there or whatever, but you don't even need to stick the bolts, and you can just weld it right to the nib rail. Here you can see the beams going across the barn. So there were beams, actually, or posts going through this whole barn here, but they put steel beams across the top. So they're sitting on top of this ledge and sitting on the ledge of the outside wall here, and that's how they can get rid of all these beams in both the holding area and the parlor itself. And there's also the only posts that are going to go into this parlor, at least by the back end of the cow, are going to have one on each corner of the pit, and that can actually help beam this as well. Okay, so there's just a little welding going through. Here's going to be the start of the brisket rail. So we can actually put the brisket rail posts in the ground, or we can put them in the wall. Because this is a black wall, it's going to be tough to actually put it against the wall. So, but if you got a straight cement wall, you can leg it into a wall. That's another way to actually put a brisket rail in here, by just angling it in here. But otherwise, you're going to be forced with putting these into the ground. You can see how it's all welded. Again, the copper tubing for it as well. Okay, so then to screed the top of it, just a pretty simple process to get a screed board to actually screed the top of it to make sure you get your 2% slope going down to the front. When we get the cement done, we're going to broom this, so we do not want slick cement in our concrete in the parlor. And when you do that, so the cows are going to be standing this way, so we're going to broom it this way so you can get more of the traction working with that as well. Okay, so space in front. If you can get 4.5 feet is nice. 5 feet is even nicer. You start going 6 and 7 feet. Cow psychologists are going to tell us a nice rounded exit alley is probably the best, but a lot of times we're all pretty well squared off here. But if I can get a minimum of 4, preferably 5, and 6 is nice to get these cows out, not a bad deal here. And then some protection of the pit here, and you really don't need to put a lot of gates or chains or whatever. The cows are pretty smart that once they're exiting, they're going to go out the door versus fall into the pit here. Okay, so the location of the post. So now we're going to get into some pretty technical parts about how to build the back end of this parlor, because that's the biggest frustration, is that if we don't build the back end right to fit the back end of a cow, then it sometimes gets a little frustrating. And so this is about 3 inches of cement in between the back post. As we take a look at this, again, this nib rail here, typically we would actually bend this again right now and actually get it up here. But again, we don't want more than 2.5 inches of this, but its basic purpose is to catch a little bit of manure, but basically to catch the slipping foot of a cow in case she ever gets a foot slip so she doesn't fall into the pit. Okay, here's just a couple, so we're going to definitely take a look. This is actually a sleeved kick rail, which most people put in sleeved kick rails so they can actually open up their chop gates right within a couple different places within the pit. And this is actually using chrome steel, but this tends to be getting these 3 bars up sometimes might be the trickiest part of actually building the whole parlor. When you take a look at it, definitely becomes a nice part to make sure they're working with it. So the location of this kick rail is crucial. So I'm going to just basically say on Holsteins it's 24 inches, on Jerseys it's 22 inches from the top of the bar. And if it's higher or lower, it's going to cost you frustrations. Okay, so or the possibility of getting kicked with it. So those are definitely the dimensions we want to try to work with. So now we've got the kick rail in, and now we're putting up the splash guard. So there's only 3 bars that run the length of this parlor. Okay, so here's where the back end of the cow is going to hit in the legs, and here's where the pin bones are not going to hit because this is way back here. You can kind of see the angle of how much that's actually back, about 9 inches from where it's going to actually first hit the cows, because we don't want those pin bones to touch anything in the parlor. The only bar that's going to get touched in this parlor is this one right here, where the cow's got a muscle. The brisket's pretty tender, so we don't want her touching here. She's going to touch this one if she tries to kick you, but the pin bones shall not touch the back of the end of the parlor. Okay, so the splash guards are simply a 2x10 or 4x10 sheet of galvanized steel cut in half, and so for a swing 8, you just need 2 of those to actually cover the whole thing, and then plus the third one to actually do the nib rails. So there's not that much steel put into the splash guards and the nib rails themselves, and the rest are just the bars. So a pretty simple process. So when you put these in, what I basically say is I've worked with a lot of great welders on building parlors, and for the money that they charge for welding for a day, it's definitely worth it to just, we tack a lot of things up, and then we have the professional welders come in and finish the job for us, and they tend to be able to work their angles and things like that and do a nice job with it. Okay, so this is another picture just of the kick rail placement. So on a Jersey, this one's actually built for a Holstein at 24 inches, and that's basically exactly where you want that bar, is right on top, because if that leg comes back, she's going to hit that, and she might not want to do that again. This Jersey, trust me, can actually kick you from personal experience in this parlor, just because this kick rail is 2 inches too high. So I kind of use that also as an example, is that there's a lot of dimensions in the blueprints, and every time that I've had somebody go against the dimensions, I usually get a phone call saying I shouldn't have done that. So just realize there's a lot of thought process into what every inch of that parlor is designed for, to make sure that there's not just safety, but the ergonomics of it as well, and that it fits the cow well as well. So the chop gates are the most difficult part of the whole parlor to do that. We don't have a blueprint, for the chop gates. And I've talked to some engineers about doing that, and every design is just a tad little bit different. So we let it up to the welders to try to figure out the angles and everything with the chop gates, because it's just it's trial and error in every situation anyway. But by basically seeing the picture what needs to be done, most welders can tend to do that. So this is what a chop gate looks like. This is a single chop gate. We can also do this as a dual chop gate, as you saw in the one video, where this piece goes up first, then it hits that piece. And so if our ceiling height is limiting, then that's kind of a bit of an issue. So these are some general guidelines. But again, if you just do this and put it in the parlor, it's probably not going to work the first time. You got to work all these different angles from going through here. It's going to rotate here, and this had to be a pretty solid thing. It's got to rotate through these angles all the way down here, back to this angle, come down, be on my kick rail, which I can actually turn from right there. And the whole key is that when I turn this, I can just basically pull this a little bit off center. And because of the weight that's in here, it's going to open this chop gate automatically, which is the goal. But a lot of chop gates don't get quite that easy, but it is possible if you really spend some time to work with it. So it's as simple as almost as pushing a button. Okay, then the swing arms. So when we tend to build the swing arms, we're tending to do something pretty simple. So it's just a piece of steel here, sleeved in a piece of steel here with a part welded on top of this, so this piece can actually rotate without falling out of here. So this piece is welded to this piece going down the center, and then it's welded to our takeoffs. And so we can actually put another steel bar and just attach the takeoff cylinder to that, or here they just used a clamp to actually just clamp it right to there. So it's a pretty simple process to work with it to get these dead center in the pit. Otherwise, you can use some square tubing and just stick some round tubing into it with some 1-inch washers and stick that. But I would tend to prefer this method up here to probably be simpler. You can just stick a little bit of oil or Vaseline or something like that into it to get them to work with. Excuse me again. Okay, so one other thing I want to mention is when your milking equipment dealer comes in to install these swing arms, or whoever installs them, they always want to put they're used to parallel parlors, and so they always want to put these arms right directly behind the cow. So the key is you want to skip about 4 feet or 44 inches to 48 inches before you actually put your first swing arm. So this swing arm actually comes and you cut the cow within a 70-degree angle. So most producers, if they have an equipment dealer putting them in, all they really need to do is take wherever they put that first swing arm and take it all the way to the back and put it on the back, and then usually it actually works out. Okay, so just we need to make sure that these aren't weighted too far to the front. You'd rather have them weighted a little bit more to the back than usual. Okay, so again, here's the thing of the swing arms. You can see the teacup trays here. This re-rod up here to be able to hang stuff seems like a nice option that a lot of producers tend to put in with the parlor as well. Okay, so this slide I do want to spend a little time with, just basically because when we take a look at the whole concept of this parlor has to fit the cow. And so I think it's imperative that we work with these measurements. So from this bar here, there's about 3 inches difference there, okay? So this bar is going to be dead center, and this is the bar where the cow is going to actually hit the back leg on it. It's going to be a muscle, so it doesn't bother her one bit to actually touch that. She wants to secure her body onto something anyway. So that's where she's actually going to touch the parlor itself. So this thing's going to get rubbed off, no big deal. Okay, so this bar, the kick rail, is going to be actually on the back end of the post here. Okay, so it's actually going to be back a little bit, so it's going to be right above the hock, which is a nice design for that. And the next one is that this bar up on top is going to be 8 or preferably 9 inches back from where it's at here to catch this whole angle in here. So again, the key is you don't want the pin bones to actually touch this parlor, because if they do, they're kind of tender on the cow. They're actually going to turn at a different angle because they don't like it. So let's just make sure we tip it back and get it so that they don't touch it, so they do tend to like it a little bit better. The variability of the parlor is going to be actually right here. So from here to where they touch the brisket is probably the most crucial one that you got to figure out your cow size. And so every time I build a milking parlor, I'm going to ask the producer, and I'll actually go out and look at his cows and see what kind of sizes we think we want to do it. Because once you put this in, you don't want to change it unless you make it that it can change. But once you figure out where it's going to be, most people tend not to change it. So the nib rail, again, 2.5 inches, no more, because of that dew claw. We don't want the dew claw to hit that. We've got 8 inches of space between the kick rail and where the back leg is going to actually touch. So the cow, all the cow visibility, and you've got to be a pretty darn tall person to not be able to see the cow there if your eyes are going to be up here. When you take a look at the pit depth itself, so we'll tend to build about 42 inches for people that are 6 feet. And so I would tend to say that it's easier for shorter people to milk up than it is for a taller person to bend their head over 1 inch to milk down. Okay, so we'll build this for the tallest person that's milking. If you got a real tall person in there with a real short person as well, sometimes we'll take a stool, something that they can actually just stand on and kick with their legs from one cow to the next. But again, it's easier for shorter people to milk up than taller people to milk down, and people tend to actually do it the opposite way. They tend to build this thing for the shortest person milking. I prefer you build it for the tallest person milking. Okay, so then we have, was there a question?
Let's see. Yeah, we do have another question here. Nope, actually there's not.
Okay, so when you take a look at the brisket rail, so 32 inches tends to be a happy medium. So for jerseys, I'd probably be down at 30, small jerseys anyway. For bigger Holsteins, I'd be at 34, but that's kind of your variability there. And head space is big. So minimum head space is about 24 inches. Unless you get a jersey, sometimes you can get down to about 20, 22, but I'd much prefer even them having 24 inches of head space here as well. So if we can get 30 inches, 2.5 feet is nice. When you start getting 36 inches of head space up here, then you need to start putting a neck rail up on top, because the cows are going to start thinking about jumping over this thing, especially, a small or a new heifer or something like that. So get by without any neck rail as long as you don't go over the 30 inches or even 32 inches, something pretty close to that. So then you'll notice the slope of the floor here, hopefully, that it's actually going up 2% here, and it's going down 2% here. And if these are 1.5%, either way, you'll notice a little bit of a difference, but 2% seems to be the cat's meow of the floor slope. So again, she's going to walk up here, walk uphill, so she's going to come in a little bit faster. She's going to turn at a 70-degree angle. Front feet are going to be lower than the back feet, so she's going to want to back up for us. And then plus, when we spray all this down, all the water is going to just head towards this way. So we can spray it down to the back of the parlor and also to the front of where the cows' heads are. Okay, so we already talked about lighting, so we want to make sure that the lighting actually goes across the parlor. Sometimes because of these posts, you can't do it, but that definitely is the thought process. And so whether you use the plastic forms here, where this was a single-sided one and then we put plastic on it, is that this plastic is worth a lot of light. So make sure that the walls are white, especially down on the pit floor. If you want it to look a little lighter, make sure you put plastic on there as well. Okay, so now we just came out of the parlor in that 5-foot door that I talked about. So we have our exit alley down here. We've got our palpation rail here that can also serve as an exit alley. This is the exit door that we cut into the side of the barn. And then back here we have maternity pens. And so the thing I want to kind of highlight a little bit is that head gates tend to actually be put in here with some swinging gates here that you can actually drop these once you get a cow in here, so the vet can actually work with it. They didn't put it in this installation and decided to just put it in the maternity pens back. So 2/3 of the barn was put into the parlor and the holding area. The other third is the palpation rail and some kind of a sick cow pen or maternity pens, which definitely is the most common way that people are trying to work with these, especially the stall barns that they work with. And so as long as they've got good walls and a good roof, these stall barns are actually great candidates for this kind of a parlor or other types of parlors as well to work with. And so if you ever get a cow that slips through that chop gate without being milked, we can actually reroute her right back in this exit alley and just put her right back in the holding area. So that's not a big deal either. Okay, so now we've got the holding area starting to be poured. We're still milking on this side over here with only about 8 stanchions going in there. And so we're going to start pouring this, and then the next day we're going to be able to put the cows in on this cement and actually start using the milking parlor while we're still pouring this the following day. So again, the process here usually tends to be about a 6 to 7 day process to get this from start to finish to actually have the parlor itself built. So now we're coming out from the holding area. This is the milking parlor here. Now this is the holding area. So we want to make sure that we're grounding everything back into the holding area as well, because we don't want cows to be catching a little stray voltage here or not catching any, and then we want them to gradually, if there is any stray voltage, they're going to gradually start working with it up here. So again, these are our copper rods. They're 8-foot copper rods put in at about 30 or 45 degrees to try to catch the beginning of the holding area. So you can see that it's all tied into the equipotential plane with the re-rod, and everything's welded together. So to get that into the fuse box and get it well grounded, because again, you do not want stray voltage in this milking parlor. So here's an example of the head space at about 2 feet. Okay, so if it's less than 2 feet, these cows are going to start turning their heads, and if cows start turning their heads, they're going to start turning their bodies as well. Okay, the other thing is that we also have to protect this first cow. So again, if we have a downward slope on the parlor, and you think of 10 or 12 cows pushing on this first cow just by gravity itself downhill, that's going to tend to be a problem. So once they're down in here and they get pushed on with nowhere to go, that might be the last time this cow actually comes down to that first spot. So when producers call and say, well, I built one of these parlors and I've got so much manure in it, it's unreal. And the first thing I'll ask them is, which way is the floor sloped? And if that floor is sloped there, I'll basically say that's probably why you're getting so much manure, because these cows are pushing on each other. And so if the cows are actually going uphill here, they're actually not pushing on each other, and it takes a little of the stress out of the parlor itself. Okay, so again, the splash guard, this one's tilted at 8 inches from here to here. And you can actually see there's actually a few pin bones once in a while that actually touch this, so that 9 inches is actually a pretty good one. But again, if these pin bones touch this parlor, that cow's going to turn at a different angle, which is something you do not want. Okay, so these unit alignment, these types of parlors used to get criticized. They don't get criticized so much anymore because of unit alignment. But once we were able to figure out the swing arms, to be able to adjust these swing arms, and these swing arms are flexible, so the cow moves, the unit can actually move a little bit with it as well. So you want to make sure that they're designed that they can put these cows in at or the units in at a 70-degree angle, and it's just a lot easier. So what I said before about mounting that first unit about 44 to 48 inches back from the front of the pit tends to create the correct angle. So again, from a parabone or a parallel parlor where they're straight across, if you just take the front unit and put it all the way back into the back unit, it actually tends to work out pretty good. Okay, so here's a nice example with the swing arms and the milking unit. So I like to show this one because the thing I don't like is for the milking units to come down here and then actually go down here and actually go back up. So here you can take a slug of milk, and it's actually got a pretty simple route to actually get into the milk line. So if you sit down here with a big slug of milk down with a milk line that would come down, it just likens it to a car coming down a hill, and then it's got to hit this car and it stops, and then this car will go forward, versus this slug of milk actually trying to go just straight through. For when it slugs here, to just get it right up into that milk line, versus having to have to sit in a big slug trying to get that through. Milk just tends to get a little bit through there a little bit easier. But most milking units are going to adapt to these parlors as well. Also nice picture just to kind of show cow visibility is that if you've got this much space, about 8 inches in between here, you can see the nice level of the kick rail as well, but you can actually tell and identify which cow is being milked versus a splash or pan that would actually come down here probably another 2 to 3 inches and actually have to come back in here so your cows are definitely going to be pretty close to the pit here. So this is actually a brother of mine who I built this milking parlor for him, and the thought process is, and this is his things, that his back is straight, I don't do any bending, I've got great cow visibility, the cows can't, in fact he's not even paying attention to what he's doing there, cows can't kick them, there's no manure in the pit. He can milk about 64 cows per person per hour, 65. It's very cheap crowd gate, bringing the cows in, and it's well worth it. His kids love it, and just a lot of other things that he said. He just does a better job milking, and his kids have actually taken an interest in it now as well. So it's kind of a nice, important thing that he didn't spend a lot of money doing it, but it definitely is a system, and that his kids enjoyed as well. Okay, so the whole issue of manure. So this looks like a lot of manure, and granted it is. But realize this is the first milking that these cows actually came through here, and we're just about done milking. So again, I tend to say if you get more than 3 cow pies for 100 cows, that's normal. You start getting 5, 6, 7, and you tend to start wondering, is there something wrong with it? It's a good day when people come out of this parlor and say, we had a no, and pardon my language, we had a no shitter today where we didn't get anybody in there. This is a milking equipment dealer. So he sat through this first milking and basically said, and shaking his head, and said, I never saw anything like it. He said, I've never seen cows come into a parlor this easy the first time. And yeah, we had to push some of the cows, but it really wasn't that big of a deal for these cows to actually come into the parlor. So again, if you do get manure down here, the goal is you don't want it in the pit. You don't want it on the person. You are going to get a little splashing here. If cows are being fed correctly and the manure is a little bit loose like it should be, versus a horse manure that's actually going to stack up pretty dry and pretty heavy. But again, the whole thought process, just a little scraper, you either scrape it forward or spray it forward, but it's pretty simple to deal with the manure on it. So stepwise, we'll just create about a 2-foot step in the front to make sure we can get these out. A 42-inch pit, we'll break that down so you have 4 steps to actually get out. So there's actually 3 steps plus the 4th one up here. So when you take a look at that thought process and to put yourself so it's an easier, this is the one in the front of the pit that you're going to be getting in and out of the most. And the one in the back should not be used very much. Why? Because you're not going to get out of the back of your pit to actually bring your cows in. Your cows are going to be brought in with a crowd gate or with cow psychology as they move through there to get them to work through there. So again, this pit is 42 inches deep, and actually this one's actually 42 in the front and 44 in the back by design. This guy's got some taller kids that he wanted to put the taller milkers in the back. But told him it's a design for a 1-person parlor, but he likes to have 2 in there anyway, just for sociability with that. So when you take a look at swing arms, this back swing arm tends to be a little bit of an issue. So I want to talk about this a little bit, because if you put this pipe all the way down and you're going to try to walk down into your pit, you're going to run your head into it. So when you take a look at this, is only coming over about halfway with the swing arm. The rest of this is all open, so I can actually walk down this pit without actually hitting my head. Or the second way they'll do this is we'll just stop it here and actually put this one right back here, and then the last unit will actually work with a reverse swing arm going the opposite way, and the unit's just going to hold back over this way, which tends to work quite well as well. And again, this is the handle for the chop gate. So wash manifolds tend to get underneath here. So if you use a 2x12, you're going to get 11 1/4 inches. I'm pretty sure down under here to actually put the milk wash manifolds. But at some point in time, you want to take a swing line down to make it a low line. You're more than welcome to do that as well. So my preference tends to be the swing line, just because, but we don't have an exact throughput working with it, because a swing 10 is equal in throughput to about a doubled up 8. So you do lose a tad efficiency by going with the swing line versus the low line. But when you take a look at the number of units, I'd rather deal with the 10 units versus dealing with 16 units. Okay, so it's kind of a personal preference with it as well with that, but that's kind of what that would look like underneath. Okay, so here's going to be another little video of just, at least I think the video is attached. Okay, so let's just pretend there's a video attached here. It actually got disconnected, but again, you can kind of see how it was just a video basically showing how they're going to detach. They're going to dip the cow, and they're going to swing the unit and reattach it. So it's a very simple process of this actually swinging over. And so rather than have some of these units underutilized, if you had the 16 versus the 10 in the doubled up, it's just that every unit's being utilized pretty much at all times. Okay, so back gates. So you can spend a lot of money on back gates. I tend not to spend much here, so you can basically just see there's a pipe here that's welded that's actually sleeved. And so just a small pipe. This is some U-channel. It's just going to fall down on top of my brisket rail, and I'm going to bring this back over top, and it's going to sit. It's just going to come over about 2 inches over center, and it's going to lay there. So a very simple chop gate or backing gate in here. So the question becomes, when you get done with the set, you can either leave 3 or 4 cows in here to milk those last 4 or 5 cows, or you can use this simple portable gate that actually has a little pipe that's going to sit on the kick rail and make sure this gets up. So this pipe does not sit on the kick rail, otherwise the cow might actually push over, and I've seen that actually happen. So that's why it's actually up a little bit. So it's straighter. The cow pushes back here. It's going to lock the U-channel in over here, so the cow's not actually being able to. So it's just one that we actually pick up, have it laying there, and just use it for the last set in the parlor. And so we have one of these for each side. But okay, so we already talked about the manure pan, that we'd much rather just have the splash guard, but again, it's a personal preference. Here's the last backing gate. You can see the chop gate here. The thing I like to see about this one is this is actually doesn't have any pipes on the ground here, so this is actually a pretty strong wall here that we could actually put it there, and we can actually adjust this. So this actually swivels here, and this brisket rail can actually move in or out 3 or 4 inches either way, just based on how this has worked. And once we get it, there's a pin here, and we just lock it in. But most producers, once they figure out where they want, it just stays locked anyway, so not a big deal. So I'm not a big fan of putting something up here to actually push a button and actually be able to push these cows back towards me. I'd rather correctly do the cement here and just let the cows back up there myself. So now we're a cow, and we're looking into the manure pit. So I can see this is kind of my test. So first of all, it looks pretty well light, so I'm not going to have that much of a problem trying to walk in through there. I don't see a lot of shadows going through here, even though the lights are going this way. We'd prefer to have these lights going this way. You can see a little shadow there, but that probably isn't going to be that big of a deal. It's wide open, so with this 12-foot garage door, it creates the wide openness part of it. You'll notice that these bars here are kind of angled, so the man pass is actually on the side a little bit. And so if you put this bar and this bar straight up, you'll actually have cows that'll, every herd's got one that'll stick their head in. They want to be nosy, and they'll stick their head in there. So it's harder to get cows going from side to side because of that one dumb cow that actually sits there and wants to watch the milking. So we'll put this on the side. It still works fine for a man pass, but it's a wide open design that we can get cows in there. And the last set, sometimes we'll put a gate in here to be able to, if you have a heifer that doesn't want to go through, you don't want to milk her first, and you don't want to milk that heifer last. You want that heifer in the middle of the line here someplace that you can get through there. But sometimes we do have difficulty with cows going through there. We'll put a little gate in there to actually get those last few cows into the pit. So that's kind of a nice little thought process of what this parlor would actually look like, being wide open, well lit. Okay, so the grooving, the holding area, and so when you take a look at it, we want to prevent the slippage, and here it's just broomed in here. But again, that's just another example of what that back end would look like with the garage door. And you want to make sure that those cows don't have access to that garage door, so you don't want that down when the cows are actually in the holding area. We want some kind of chains or something like that trying to protect them. So we get a lot of questions on crowd gates, and so I used to be the big believer that if you spent $100 on a crowd gate, you spent too much. I tend to like the ones that are $4,000 and $5,000 as my career gets a little bit older and producers are working with them. But if you can't afford one, simply a PVC pipe with chain coming down every 8 inches. And these chains are ones that don't interlock. So if this chain contacts that chain, they're just going to fall back apart versus get connected. So there's some swing set type chains that this one will contact that one and they'll stick together. You want to make sure you get some kinds that don't stick together and will just fall apart. High tensile wire on top, 2 electrical screw-in eyelets here. There will also be on the front end of this. You can see kind of chains are going down through here, but basically just eye bolts that are going to be on top of this PVC pipe threaded through the high tensile wire. And so this thing is just going to go back and forth on these eyelets. And on the front end of this is, and it could be on the back end too, but the wire tightener. So the high tensile wire is pretty tight. Again, with the screw-in insulator there, this thing will be electrified a little bit, and then you can actually pull this from inside the pit. So it's not that big of a deal to actually get this moving here. So this is the back end of that same barn we've been looking at where there was a stall barn, and now this is a maternity pen, and the head gate isn't in here yet, but there was a head gate going into it as well. And so when you take a look at the thought process of producers trying to build this themselves, definitely a lot of people that are actually doing that. So again, the question becomes on the blueprints. There's also a lot of these videos, more information are on these websites below. There's probably more on the dairy team, or the dairy website in Dubuque County, which is my resource page. And so please feel free to go there, print off the blueprints, look at the videos. There's also a lot of stuff there about robotic milking and just a whole host of other things there as well. So that's in a nutshell how we go about the thought process of the Trans-Iowa low-cost milking parlor and how it's built. And again, I'll basically put this parlor up against any parlor that I've ever seen in operation for ergonomics especially, and also for safety, but it tends to be just as well for labor efficiency and especially financial efficiency as well. And as people build parlors, there's so many things. It's kind of like buying a car. There's a lot of personal preferences of what people like and what they don't like. So I'm not saying this is the type for everybody, but we've definitely had a lot of success with the parlor, and we'll kind of go from there. So does anybody have any comments or questions or anything you guys want to have a little discussion about? We can head that route as well. There are questions on other types of parlors. I tend to work with a lot of milking systems.
Questions? Yeah, we have one.
I'm just curious what the floor surface of where the milkers are standing. Is that just brushed concrete too, or room concrete, or do you have?
Okay, the floor surface, you've got some options there. Some people have rubber matting on them. And that's one of the thoughts about when you build this pit, make sure you don't build it too shallow, because if you want it a little bit less shallow, you can always add mats into it. And definitely when we take a look at worker comfort, just to put that cushion on a milker's foot tends to work out pretty well. And sometimes you can put a 1/2-inch mat in there. Sometimes you can put an inch mat in there. But if you build the pit too shallow, it's tough to get it deeper. So, but we can make it shallower with the mat. So we do see quite a few using that surface. We also see, I wouldn't say quite a few, but we see some people actually put rubberized matting on the cow platform as well. And so the cows aren't even actually walking on concrete. They're actually walking on a nice rubber mat. In fact, this gentleman in the picture here decided to put the rubber matting on his parlor, and he actually liked it quite well. And so that's another option as well, is that these cows don't have to walk on concrete either. Good question. Appreciate that. Any others?
Pardon me. Any specific tips about exit lane construction to make cows want to go out them?
Okay, so tips on exit lanes. Okay, so the exit lanes, you want somewhere in that 32 to 36 inches of width. And the downside about that, so that's kind of what the cow prefers to get out the fastest. The downside is, how do you now clean this? So now you get it down to 36 inches, you're definitely in a manual scrape type system. So if you want to use a skid steer, then you got to take at least the width of the skid steer bucket, add probably another 3-4 inches on each side to be able to have a little leeway to get turned and things like that into that. So it's kind of how you're going to clean it probably determines the width of it. But when you take a look at the exit is, first of all, let's go back to the holding area. So without a doubt, when you're building this thing, you want these cows coming straight in. So any kind of an angle that cows come in to the parlor is going to cost you on time. Okay, so it's got to be straight into this parlor. When the cows leave, we can then take a corner because they don't mind. They tend to want to get out of this thing, so it's not that big of a deal. And so the ones that are on, say if we have a double exit, cows actually will exit faster on the opposite side of the parlor than they're actually on, believe it or not, because they like to take that angle back. And when you take the angle right next to the door, if that's where the cow platform those cows are on, they actually have a more difficult time actually making that corner on the side that they're actually working with. And so a lot of people like the walk-in type pits. And so if you do the walk-in type pit, you no doubt need a double exit alley. But the exit alley, as long as they got 4 or 5 feet to actually to be able to walk through it. The biggest thing is that we realize that the cow's total profile lengthwise is about 7 feet. And so there's a lot of parlors that are designed where this cow has to make a corner just going outside a door and then making a corner in about 4 feet. And she doesn't like that. She needs a bigger profile. So when you take a look at getting cows to exit out, you need to make these door spaces, I tend to say about 5 feet wide, and then still give them about 3 or 4 feet at least to turn their head, or to make sure that there's not a big gate there where their head's going to hit, even if it's down a little bit lower, not a big deal. You can take a look at that. But the exit alleys, the biggest issues are going to be those corners, taking it and the width. And the skid steer is probably going to determine the width of it if you need to use the skid steer.
I was out of the room for just a second there. Did you see the question? We have a third question.
Okay, let me just pop it up here. It doesn't come up automatically.
I can pop it up.
Okay, so the question is, can you incorporate windows on sidewalls and in front of the parlor will it interrupt cow flow? And the answer, I'm going to do this one live, and hopefully they can hear me live. When we take a look at the whole thought process of the windows, is that windows tend not to interrupt. Windows actually tend to encourage it because they create more light in the parlor. And so when the windows, if there's people behind the windows that are causing a disturbance or jumping up with their hands or whatever, a lot of kids on the backside, that interruption, because cows like things calm, might do it. But the window itself shouldn't cause much of a problem at all. And if it's creating light, like I said, it actually tends to work out pretty good. Some of the nicest ones I've seen are ones that just open up even a big door in the front there for the summertime to really let some airflow. And that's one thing I didn't mention very much is the total airflow thing, is that if you can wind tunnel these parlors, they really work out nice, especially if you got those big doors in the front. And the people in the pit tend to be pretty cool. Or at least not as hot as they would be otherwise. Otherwise, in the wintertime, you're doing more of a cross ventilation type system. And sometimes we get the questions as well as how do you heat this thing? And so heat-wise, sometimes we put the in-floor heat in. That tends to work out pretty well. You can, the one that we were standing in right there is basically just a very small heater that heats that. In fact, this guy that was helping with me, his dad's parlor that we built also just has a very small heater in it that you'd buy at what we call Fleet Farms or your farm supply type store. The people using a milk house, that's all they use to actually heat that one. But depending on the direction of the wind or where this thing's actually situated, you might need something more that's a pretty good size heater or the in-floor heat. Okay, so my last challenge is then, again, if a 12-year-old kid can milk 64 cows an hour, the challenge is, where are we in the rest of the industry to try to get to that kind of efficiency, unless there's other issues and family values and you know, bonding in the parlor or bonding in the stall barn and things like that that you feel overvalue. And I'm not knocking that at all, but it just, again, there's simple ways to get 64 cows milk per person per hour. And so that's kind of the challenges as an industry, is there's ways to do that. So I appreciate your attention.
Okay.
Hopefully all the technology worked out okay.
Yeah, thank you very much for your time.
You're welcome.
All right, have a great day.
Yep, you too. Have a great rest of the day.